Thank you so much for being here today. It's great to have such a diverse group with us. My name is Ferlanda Luna. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Coimbra and also member of the Young Research Council of the SHiFT Cost Action. So here it's a space within SHiFT dedicated to early career research and professionals. So through our work and project, the goal is to build a strong and collaborative community, encourage exchange, and highlight the role of the young researchers in address complex global challenges, such as climate change. So in these sessions, we aim to explore interdisciplinary research approaches, focus on fieldwork and empirical research, methodological challenges, and how the different disciplines can contribute to systemic transformation. At the same time, here we want to create a space for dialogue and potential collaboration across the cost action network once we have people here from different cost actions. So let me briefly guide you through today's session. We will start with the speaker's presentation. We will have 3 presentations with 20 minutes. And after that, we will open the floor for discussion and question. But please feel free to send your questions in the chat during the presentations. I will collect all of them. And at the end of this session, we will have time to discuss and answer your reflections and doubts. And of course, we want to see your contribution throughout these topics. So let's start with our first speaker. Is Joana Sá Couto. She's an anthropologist with a PhD in climate change and sustainable development policies from the Institute of Social Science of the University of Lisbon. Her research is based on ethnographic fieldwork with fishing communities in Setúbal and Sesimbra, focusing on local ecological knowledge, labor practice, and human-environment interactions. So, Joana, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Am I sharing the screen?
Yes, we can see.
Yes, you can see just the presentation?
The presentation, yes, is working.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. So, hello everyone. I would like to just thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to be here today alongside 2 other young women. My name is Joana, and today I will be presenting a bit of my work on this presentation, Navigating Nets and Knowledge. This is based on my ethnographic fieldwork conducted with fishers in Setúbal and Sesimbra for my PhD thesis in the PhD program of Climate Change and Sustainable Development Policies. So, as we know, climate change is a very complex phenomenon. However, in this research, I tried to focus on how climate change is experienced, interpreted, and acted upon in everyday work. More specifically, I looked at fishers as actors who continuously engage with environmental variability and uncertainty. So, in this case, small-scale fishers are particularly relevant for several reasons. First, their work depends on environmental conditions. This includes, obviously, the health and abundance of the ocean, but also the weather conditions, which can determine whether they even return safely to land. Secondly, they accumulate experience-based local empirical knowledge regarding the nature and the environment. And third, they're highly exposed to environmental and economic change, making them particularly vulnerable. This makes them key actors for understanding how climate change is perceived and navigated in practice. So my fieldwork was conducted in Portugal, in this space right here. So Sesimbra is here, Setúbal is here, and in the green, it's the first maritime protected area of Portugal, Parque Marinho Luís Saldanha. These are contexts where small-scale fisheries operate under increasing pressure, including not only environmental variability, but also market constraints and regulatory frameworks. It is important to mention that the blue economy can have a marginalizing effect on fishers by prioritizing other sectors, such as tourism and other activities that can bring more capital. So basically, this study focuses on everyday fishing practices and their forms of knowledge. Basically, my research question was, how can the changes in the environment been affecting the relationships of fishers with the environment in which they work, and that socially and culturally sustains their lives. So the specific objectives were to understand how fishers express local knowledge, how these global frictions transform local knowledge and influence behavior. I tried to analyze how synthetic materials can impact the way in how they express the knowledge and how they interpret conservation policies. This research drawed on the three main ideas: ecologies of labor, which understands labor as a mediator between the human-nature relationship; the concept of local knowledge, emphasizing that this knowledge is produced in specific contexts and through practice; and an understanding of climate change as a lived and experienced process, more than just an abstract phenomenon. This framework allowed us to move beyond some disciplinary boundaries and rethink how climate knowledge is produced while challenging the hierarchy between scientific and experiential knowledge. So how did I do that? Methodologically, by ethnographic fieldwork, which includes participant observation, both at sea and on land, ethnographic interviews, long-term immersion in the field. I have found that ethnography is particularly useful because it allowed me access to forms of knowledge that are more embodied and difficult to formalize verbally. Conducting fieldwork in this context meant working alongside fishers and engaging with their daily routines. I spent a lot of time going there every day. One strategy that proved particularly useful for me was maintaining a humble attitude, willingness to learn. I'm not a very extroverted person. Making conversation can actually be hard for me. So because of that, I adopted a different strategy. I started by learning how to tie knots, and then I learned how to make nets, and I had to actually learn how to be comfortable in the silence of it all, and also my own anxieties. But yeah, being present proved very important because it revealed how decisions are made under conditions of uncertainty. For example, deciding where to fish involves interpreting multiple environmental signals, but also prior knowledge of successful catches in certain places. These decisions are based on accumulated experience, particularly in small-scale fisheries. They use these small boats here. Of course, in bigger boats, such as the per scene fishing ones, traineiras, as we say in Portugal, fishers, they have electronic systems that record. It has like a map, and it records, it pinpoints where they put the nets previously, and then they can use that to support decision making. But mostly decisions are based on more of an instinct, knowledge of resource pattern, and also weather conditions. So now let's focus a bit on the challenges. I think we should begin with what might be considered obvious, gender. I am a woman. Fisheries in Portugal are traditionally male-dominated. I even had a researcher ask me, how did I manage to get fishers to talk to me as a woman? They did. There were some constraints. For example, they had a very high reluctance to take me out to sea. It was very late in my field work because it was very hard for them to take me because they said it was too cold and too hard and too in the middle of the night and I should be asleep and whatever. But mostly, I think being a woman became an advantage for me. I was not perceived as a threat, so I was not like some recreational fisher trying to identify the best fishing spots. I was clearly not a policewoman. I also looked quite young, which helped, and it allowed me to get to have deeper conversations, and even moments of emotion, of emotional vulnerability, including actually crying, which I believe would not have happened if I were a man. Of course, there were uncomfortable moments, but that's part of the job and life more generally. Much of my ethnographic work also, it's important to say that involves trust, creating trust with people. Entering the field requires building relationships over time, getting to know people, and also allowing oneself to be known. It sometimes means spending entire afternoons talking about things that have nothing to do with your research, but those moments are as essential as the ones with the big data moments. It is that trust, that access, that allows me to access forms of knowledge that in case of fishers are often not even verbalized. They are performed rather than explained. I also strongly felt the challenge of taking my fieldwork notes and analyzing them without oversimplifying or romanticizing it. And I do argue that fishers are very important for ocean sustainability, but I do know that they have some behaviors that may not be considered sustainable and are not considered sustainable. Some of them are not in the thesis because it's not right, but they do happen and people know that they happen. In this sense, fieldwork is more than just data collection. It's a process of knowledge co-production that requires reflexivity of our own positionality, as well as scientific rigor. Even when these relationships become closer, even friendships, there are boundaries. Even if someone calls me a granddaughter or friend, I can't assume myself to be part of a community that I know that I am not, and I never will be, unless even if I think academia is too precarious and I become a fisherwoman. Even then, perhaps I will never be a part of that community. So, still, ethnography is very important to access forms of knowledge that can only be accessed by true participation. So this method proved essential for me to reach deeper issues in fisheries that cannot be accessed through surveys or brief visits. One example, for example, during my first visits, I noticed how clothes hanging, migrants working in the harbor, yes, but it was weeks later, months later, that I understood, for example, that 6 people were living in the warehouse, how they were being paid differently, etc. One of the key findings when we work on fisheries is the central role of uncertainty. So fishing is not a routine activity, it's a continuous process of environmental interpretations. Fishers constantly read the sea, adjust their decisions based on changing conditions, and this highlights the dynamic and adaptive nature of their knowledge. Another important insight is their very large knowledge and perception of environmental change. Fishers report shifts in ocean temperature, species distribution, changes in seasonal patterns, and increasing unpredictability. In this case, fishers detect changes even when they are captured, even before they are captured in scientific data sets. For example, recently a fisher told me, because I'm now working at the Portuguese Institute for the Sea and Atmosphere, he asked me to tell them, to ask them, why do we now have tuna in Sesimbra just jumping into our nets? We don't want to catch them because we can't, but they are just jumping into our nets. And when I brought this up, for example, to a researcher there at the Institute, she said that they are probably confusing the fish with another species. And it's just an example of how local knowledge is disregarded. So a third insight is material culture as local ecological knowledge. Nets are not just tools. They reflect this accumulated knowledge about species behavior and environmental conditions. Over time, they have adapted their gear in response to changing conditions, not only environmental, but also economic. However, this knowledge is not fully recognized or integrated into formal frameworks. There are persistent tensions between knowledge and regulatory and scientific systems. While scientific knowledge tends to be more abstract and aggregated, fishers' knowledge is very immediate, is very practice-based. So the ways in which these types of knowledge are communicated are not always immediately accessible. And it also actually varies between different individuals. Some fishers can talk to me about climate change without ever saying climate change. What can appear as more of an instinct or random acts are in fact deeply rooted in knowledge-based decision-making. So the issue here is not the absence of knowledge, but the lack of translation between different knowledge systems. So this raises an important question about whose knowledge counts or is taken into account in climate governance. I would also like to highlight the need to engage with concepts such as justice and human rights within the discussions of sustainable development, particularly in light of the ongoing processes of marginalization and precarization affecting small-scale fisheries, and now also migrant workers in fisheries. There's an urgent need to rethink more locally grounded and sustainable forms of governance, including ways of recognizing and valuing the labor of fishing. And these findings have some broader implications about how we think about climate change, how we think about systemic transformation. It helps us to think of addressing climate change and integrating different forms of knowledge. Here, ethnography can play a very important role, making visible those ways of knowledge that are often overlooked. And it can help create connections between the research context and different epistemologies. So to conclude, and because I don't want to take much more of your time, this research shows that knowledge about climate change is produced through everyday labor and practice. Climate change is not just a scientific problem. It's a question of whose knowledge we actually listen to. We know that fishers are directly affected by environmental change. They are active producers of knowledge about it. So the challenge here is not only to understand climate change, but to recognize who already understands it as such. So navigating climate futures requires navigating between different forms of knowing. And thank you so much. Look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Joana. It's really, really amazing your research. And I also did a field work, and I know the challenge that we have as a woman to approach the object of our research. And one thing that your presentation reminds me what Magnani, he's also an anthropologist, and he said we just have to not look our object of research, but to be with them, experience the life with them, the daily challenges, the daily activities is the main thing of doing ethnography, to be there, to be exactly there, not only the theory, not to read all the books, but to be with them. So thank you so much. The participants could start to send the questions in the chat. I will address it at the end of the session. And now we can proceed to the second presentation. It's Alexandra. She's a PhD candidate in urban planning at the Mincu University of Architecture and Urbanism. She's specialized in urban mobility and landscape architecture. Also, her research focuses on tourist mobility, exploring strategies and plans for better to promote sustainability, mitigate the impacts of mass tourism, and encourage more active forms of movement. Welcome, Alexandra.
Thank you for having me today. My name is Alexandra, and I will present to you today my research, a short investigation in mapping visitor preferred paths in Timgad. It is based on my micro-investigation I carried out during my visit in during the CitySenZ sensorial school in Timgad. And it's connected to the broader SHiFT workshop theme of climate futures and systemic challenges. Today I will show you how visitors actually move through the site, how that compares with the routes suggested in tourist materials, and what is the relevance about fieldwork in an outdoor heritage site. Today's presentation will be divided in 4 sections. I will start with the research question and the objectives, then followed by the methodology that I used, and I will finish with the conclusions. The objective of this study is to better understand how visitors move through Timgad in practice. More specifically, I wanted to compare real movement with planned routes that appear in tourist maps or guided visits in the TeamGuide site. What interested me the most was not only the routes itself, but also the relation between movement and the sensorial experience of the site, where people slow down, where they pause, where they take photographs, and what kinds of spaces attract attentions. In this sense, the study is about special behavior, but also about atmosphere, comfort, and perception. Before continuing with the objective, I would like to give you some context regarding the site. TeamGuide is a UNESCO World Heritage Roman site located in Algeria, created as a military colony by the Emperor Trajan, known for its square enclosures and orthogonal grid plan based on the Cardio and Decumanos, as you can see in the picture as well. TeamGuide is a very useful site for this kind of study because it's a Roman layout which is highly structured, and the orthogonal grid with the Cardo and Decumanos as the main axis create a clear spatial order. Because of the site is legible in design, it becomes easier to see when visitors follow the intended routes and when they don't. That makes every deviation, shortcut, pause, or cluster of attention meaningful. In other words, the site itself gives us a strong framework for observing movement and interpretation. And at the same time, TeamGuide is an outdoor heritage site, which means that weather, sun, exposure, and comfort all matters. This is why climate-sensitive fieldwork is not just a background condition here, it's shaping the data as well. The map in the right that you can see in the right was produced as well during the research to make it more to make it easier for the tourists to mark their routes for the visit and to be much clearer for them what they saw, even though the site, as you saw in the picture, is actually an open site and yeah, it's not very clear where everything is located. For the research questions, the central research question guiding this investigation was how do visitors prefer to move through TeamGuide, and how are these preferred paths shaped by spatial and sensorial ambience. And for that question, I also looked at three additional issues. The first one regarding the desired lines, if the visitors follow the special logic that was planned or suggested by the tourist materials. The second one regarding the viewpoints and the resting areas. And the third one, what is influencing the route choices. So the investigation is really about the gap between design space and the live space. For the objectives of this micro-investigation, we have 4 of them. First, to identify the dominant and alternative visitor trajectories, then to detect informal or emergent paths that diverge from the planned circulation, followed to the location of the ambience node, meaning areas where visitors slow down to experience the space, maybe to take pictures or to have a rest. And the final one is to examine how climate, shade, or visibility influences these route paths. For the methodology and the data collection, This combines both qualitative and quantitative approaches. On the quantitative side, I used the physical map where visitor paths were manually recorded and GPS, as well as GPS tracking through a mobile application to capture the movement more precise. On the qualitative side, I conducted a direct observation on site, which allowed me to identify where the visitor stopped, said, took pictures, or showed particular interest. Combining these two approaches made it possible for me to understand both the routes and the reason behind the routes. And this mixed method design was especially useful because movement in a heritage site is not only a matter of distance, but it's also a matter of attention, comfort, and interpretation. During the field trip, we had some limitation. The data collection, even though the sensorial school was during two days, we had just 1 day for collecting data, which was a limitation because, for example, the second day was raining and we also have to leave. So it was a different experience from the day that we collected the data because it was sunny. The setting was particularly appropriate for a sensorial approach because it encouraged attention to how people experience spaces through movement, pause, and embodied presence. The environment was open, exposed, and sometimes physically demanding. Sometimes the observation of visitor could not be separated from the condition of the site itself. Heat, shade, fatigue, and visibility all have an influence on where people move and where they stopped. So the field work setting was not neutral backdrop. It was also part of the research problem. As challenges, it's important to acknowledge the limitation of the investigation. The data collection period was relatively short, so the findings cannot be treated as fully representative of all behaviors, visitor behaviors, especially because, for example, in TeamGAD, there is we have all the 4 seasons, so sometimes it's snowing as well, so it's very cold. That means that in this particular seasons, probably the visitors prefer to have a shorter route than when it's summer or when it's warmer outside. Another key limitation is weather. Visitor movement changes with temperature, sunlight, and seasonal condition, which I mentioned already. There were also practical challenges in observation itself, because sometimes following visitors' movement continuously is difficult in an open site, and recording behavior in real time always involves some loss of details. These difficulties are part of what makes sensitive field both challenging and methodologically interesting. For the data collection and management, the output of the investigation will be mainly spatial and analytical comparisons. The core analytic goals is to compare observed movement with the official tourist map used by guides. On the qualitative side, I focused on movement density and frequency. This helps identify which part of the site I use most intensively and where circulation slows down or clusters. On the qualitative side, I interpreted behaviors observed on the site. That includes reading why some spaces seem more attractive than others, whether because of visibility, accessibility, ambience, or cultural significance. The final product will be a heat map showing movement intensity across the site, which can then be compared to the planned visitor route. For the main insights, the first major insight in the is the visitors don't really follow the strict paths. Instead, they tend to move in a more organic way, with some freedom to choose how they navigate the site, especially because it's an open site, so they can go inside of the ruins. This suggests divergence between the planned special organization and the actual use. Even in a site with a strong Roman grid, visitors do not simply reproduce the formal logic of the plan. And that matters because it shows that heritage space is not only read as an architectural system, it's also experienced as a flexible lived environment. And for the second main insight is that certain areas constantly attract more attention than others. These seems to be places where visibility, accessibility, relaxation, ambience, or cultural interest overlap. So stopping points are not random. They are often tied to a combination of spatial and sensorial factors. In a practical terms, this means that visitors are not only following paths, they are also responding to movements of rest, orientation, and visual attraction. This is one of the reasons why observing pause can be just as important as tracing the route. For the this small investigation has broader relevance beyond ThinkGad. It shows that climate-sensitive fieldwork affects not only what we observe, but also how we can collect, organize, and interpret the data. It also illustrates the value of combining qualitative and quantitative methods when studying movement is an open heritage site. The site is not just a spatial object, it's a field of experience shaped by environmental and sensorial condition. And in conclusion, this micro-investigation shows that visitors in ThinkGad often move in flexible, organic ways rather than strictly following the planned route. Their preferred paths are shaped by the spatial form, by sensorial ambiances, and by practical conditions such as comfort or visibility. It also shows that short-term field can still produce meaningful results as long as the limitations are made explicit. In this sense, the study is not only about visitor movement, it's also about how we study movement in a climate-sensitive condition. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. It's really nice to see how the heritage is connected with the climate change and how this kind of results just can be if you do a field work. If the visitors fill a form, you cannot have this analysis if you not also be there as a visitor and as an investigator to see how the things is in the reality in this kind of contest. So thank you so much. Now we proceed to our last presentation with Fizza Fatima. She is a PhD research working in the intersection of environment justice, urban planning, and health, working also with ERC Food and Waste Project. She's investigating the impact of heat waves and on migrant communities across urban environments in Europe. Thank you so much, Fizza. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for gathering us and also giving the chance to share research and the challenges. I'll start by sharing my screen. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see.
Okay. So, hi everyone, I'm Fizza. I'm a PhD candidate based at the BCN UEJ lab at ICTA, based at Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona. And I'll be talking about, my topic is mainly regarding advancing climate justice through a migrant-centric epistemology. And I'll start by giving you a little bit of a background into why this work is important to sort of set the stage to get to the challenges eventually. So as we know, heat waves have increased in frequency and severity across most of Europe, and there have been over 175,000 deaths annually due to heat in cities. But studies have shown that this vulnerability to heat is not evenly distributed, and those with a migration background experience much higher levels of heat-associated morbidity and mortality. Despite this, migrants and racialized populations remain excluded from vulnerability and adaptation discourse, both in terms of what their needs are, what their specific vulnerability is, and their participation. So my research in this context focuses on how vulnerability is being shaped in these urban environments due to a host of intersecting factors. I started by conducting a scientific scoping review, which led me to determination of a set of 6 vulnerability drivers specific to European cities that tell us what makes migrants vulnerable in these contexts, ranging from systemic inequality to discriminatory policy environments. I've listed them here. I won't go into a lot of detail, but I'll just quickly present a few examples. So for example, within the indicator of employment, we found that the delivery sector across most of European cities is overrepresented by migrants, which includes precarious employment for them because it involves waiting in extreme heat between deliveries and also the kind of contracts they receive. We found examples of food delivery companies across Spain and Greece being fined for exploitative practices and also pressuring delivery workers to accept false freelance contracts, which again deprives them of employment benefits such as health insurance and paid leave in case they get sick. In terms of urban and built environment and neighborhood characteristics, we found that access to heat relief spaces is not egalitarian. For example, in the case of Oslo, you see here that with every 100-meter distance from water bodies, there's a 3% increase in the migrant ratio. Similarly, in Dutch cities, we found that homes within 500 meters to 700 kilometers to green spaces are around 1.6 to 16 times more expensive, making them inaccessible for low-income migrants. And then also we found that retrofit projects such as the Elephant Park project in London has displaced over 3,000 low-income and minority residents. Another topic that I heavily draw on is heat justice, which focuses on framing heat as which focuses on moving away from framing heat as a silent, chronic, and invisible killer, because as opposed to other hazards that we know, rainfall or thunderstorms and hurricanes, heat is not visible to the eye, so a lot of times it's termed as the invisible killer. And then within this discourse, the focus is on understanding heat not only from satellite images and sensors and metrics, which sort of invisibilizes the human experience, and then it obscures the socio-political drivers of heat inequity in our cities. And then the recommendation is to reframe heat as thermal insecurity or inequity or injustice, which then again places the focus on the power relations in our environment. So in my research, I'm looking at heat as an intersectional, political, relational, and place-based phenomena rather than something that is just inherent or static or that just makes migrants vulnerable by default just due to their migration status. And so I like this quote here a lot, which is about focusing on power relations in the environment, which can open up new situated, place-based, embodied, and political meanings of heat and bring together diverse claims, practices, ethics, and technologies for addressing heat inequity. And so in my research, what I'm trying to do is balance this integrating science perspective with participatory and creative methods that I'm working with. So there's 6 main methods that I'm working with. I won't go into a lot of detail, but my case study cities are Athens in Greece and Berlin in Germany. I've already conducted a lot of these methods in Athens, so I'll just quickly talk about some of the methods and what we found so far. So for body maps is a creative method where I invited migrants to participatory workshops where they outline their body and then they marked where in the body they feel heat in relation to their social spatial environment. So you have some pictures here. And then the next method I'm working with is the relief maps, which is a method that was developed at UPFA at Pompeu Fabra in Barcelona. And this is very specific for understanding how intersectional experiences in urban environments. And this is also an image that from the workshop I conducted in Athens with migrant communities. The third is walk along. So this included a walk with migrant and queer participants in Athens around a migrant-centric neighborhood. And we documented how public spaces and private spaces, what kind of spaces migrants use for heat relief, what is absent and what is needed in terms of future adaptation. And then postcards is a method I'm also using to understand migrants' needs for the future, what is missing in cities. So this is also a creative method where you sort of use the collage technique to understand how migrants see it. And this was a very interesting method because in our project, we saw it more as an individual method where each person makes their own postcard, but then the reflections at the end were more participatory and more connected to a collective future, which was very interesting and surprising in a positive way. And then, so the topic of integrating science in these creative and participatory methods I'm working with is essentially like the big theme, but also the big challenge that I'm struggling with. And I think one of the presenters, Joana, also talked about it, so it would be great to hear from you towards the end as well. But essentially, yeah, this is the main theme: to examine how situated practices and embodied knowledges of majority world migrants inform their adaptive capacities to heat, and how these are interacting with mainstream efforts that are being done by governments in their cities. And my aim is to eventually contribute to emerging policy and discourse on climate health justice and urban heat adaptation. So starting with the challenges, and I also like to frame them as reflections. Again, this sort of balance between science, what we call science, and participatory data, and then using the knowledge that I will gather from my methods to convince scientists and urbanists. I did mention that my background is in architecture and urban planning. So I know from personal experience that, as urban planners, you tend to have this tendency to rely on metrics and maps to kind of ascertain climate future steps. So that's something I have in mind. And then in my workshop, something that I have to be really sensitive about and something I'm constantly learning. And if people here have feedback or reflections, that'd be great to hear. Because when we're talking about embodied experiences to heat, and the questions are so related to people's bodies and their experience, a lot of times I have to be very careful, particularly when my participants include women and LGBTQ migrants. And also I'm very I'm also very conscious of this because in contexts like Athens, I understand like the policy is very oppressive. There's a lot of border violence that sort of dictates the other policies that are carried out in the cities. And on top of that, these communities are also facing everyday racism in their lives. And then the third point is keeping my own bias aside, because I'm from Pakistan originally, so I myself am a migrant in Europe. So I wonder if that is even a possibility to keep that aside. And then also another thing I feel is listening from migrants at my workshops, and then a lot of times people really open up and they share experiences of othering that they've experienced in their daily life, which sort of then affects my work and my mental health, because a lot of times, you know, you're a researcher, you're here to like, or at least I'm trying to bring their narratives forward, but I also feel limited by how much impact my research can have overall. And then I'm also cautious, or I try to be cautious of ethical dimensions for knowledge co-creation, and also what we're terming as or considering as knowledge, and at the same time doing this in a way that is protecting marginalized groups and their practices. And then lastly, co-creating knowledge, drawing on their embodied experiences and situated knowledge towards a more just future, so that eventually getting these practices and these personal experiences of vulnerability to the forefront to inform policy at the local or the national level. So I'll stop there, and then, yeah, I'd like to hear from other people as well.
Thank you so much, Fizza. It's really amazing when we see that our research is also part of us. And it's really challenging when we have to separate the scientists from the people, from our emotion, from our experience and history here as an immigrant. So we have here some questions. I will start with Alexandra. The first, Alexandra Sergio asked to you why affordance of digital technologies matters to promote sensorial ambience research regarding the Tingat case.
Yes, I think it was just a misunderstanding, or I communicated, because it was not about affordance or to promote the sensorial ambience. It was just a tool that we used during the research, because actually it was a proposal of one of the person that we asked to have a physical map and mark the path that they are doing, and they suggested actually to use a digital app with GPS tracking that will be somehow easier for them, because they don't have to look on the plan and mark everything. They just have to visit just like a normal visitor the area, and when they finish, they just sent us the map with the route. And it was interesting for us also to compare it to the physical ones, because if you don't have to check on the map, maybe you don't remember which way you went. So we wanted to see in this way, because we had a few of the digital maps as well, if it's a difference between the way that people that marked physical on the map the routes with the ones that were just going freely. And there was not such big difference in them. So it was not regarding affordance, like affordability, or like to promote the matter, just a way that we another type of instrument, let's say, to collect the data.
Many thanks, Alexandra. Ferlanda, can I jump for just a follow-up question?
Yes.
Alexandra was also asking in the sense, because you told about how you did this digital map, but if the other participants also would do the same, so the way on how they use their affordances would be different, or everyone would recreate Tingat at the same way. So that was you answered a little bit how it used the digital map, but I was curious about different perspectives on how you would experiment this ambience through the digital technologies.
I'm not sure if I understood
Yes.
it
In a sense, for example,
correctly.
if you are using this app that you do the digital map, the other participants they would use differently, all right? So they would map in different circumstances, like the Tingad space.
Yeah, it's just a tracking mechanism. You can use any tracking app, it doesn't matter. It's just we needed to see the path. So for example, we used Strava and another one, but I don't remember the name. So you can use any digital tracker. We only needed to see the path, and we took the path that the visitor did and overlaid on our map.
Okay, so it's explained. It's just because I thought that was a way that they also would map the ambiences, how they experience and sense. But no, it's one way to create digital traces actually for where we go.
Yeah.
That
Actually, one of
okay.
my colleagues did that with a questionnaire. So it was not part of my research, but someone did this. They had a questionnaire, and everywhere they stopped, they had to add some inputs like the light, how they felt there, why they stopped, things like this, more like sensorial, stuff, let's say.
Okay, so thank you so much.
Thank you too.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. I will lead the next question to Joana. Stephanie asked, based on your experience now in field work, how do you think as a woman you could better prepare to deal with challenges that you face? If you have to go again to the field work, what you do differently or better?
Thank you, Stephanie, for that question. I think that navigating social boundaries is difficult. I think that, for example, things like giving up your phone number should maybe don't do that until the relationship is already established to prevent some uncomfortable situations. That just that's just what came to mind first, because that was a situation that was not great. I also didn't share social media with anyone until I had a prior relationship. If I can be totally honest, when I started my fieldwork, I tried to use the looser clothing, not very revealing clothing. I tried to cover up my tattoos or my stretched ears, for example, because I didn't want any comments or to make people uncomfortable with my body modifications. But that turned out it wasn't really a challenge. So when I felt more comfortable, I would just wear whatever I wanted, which was nice. I think it really depends on the relationship that you establish, but truly, if I went again, or in the next experience that I will have more strict contact boundaries, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you, Joana. So the next three questions is for Fatima. I will ask one by one. So the first one is, did you notice all the vulnerable intersections between migrants, example, gender or other, and how did they interact?
Right, thank you for the question. So it's true that in some cases, I did notice specific vulnerabilities for subgroups within migrant communities. For example, for women and for refugees, we found that they rely highly on social networks to access spaces for heat relief, which could be parks or the beach. And this may be due to past experiences of discrimination or violence, but they prefer to access these spaces not alone, but in groups, which is not always an option if you're a refugee or a newly arrived migrant. We also learned that women in particular have care duties a lot. So they also need access to parks and other spaces for relief within their neighborhoods or very close to their cities. And again, so there's similar nuances which I found for specific subgroups. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, the next question is from Irma. Can you explain again how do you conduct participatory method or collect participatory data?
Right. So for each of the method, we have developed protocols within the project. So we have like a little bit of idea on how the workshop will go, but then for each city, the project has other cities as well. So for each city, every researcher has to kind of narrow it down based on the things they're researching. So I kind of have that as like a roadmap, but then for each method, it varies a lot. And then on conducting data, I have consent forms which are aligned with GDPR regulations. But then I also like to give participants the choice to revoke their consent at a later time. They can choose whether I can use their name or use direct codes. And if they choose to not give consent, that's fine. And a lot of times I realize people also give consent when they're in a group and later they have mixed feelings. So I always tell them, you can tell me later and modify consent. So it depends on each method. For relief maps, it's an online tool. So it's all collected online. Yeah.
So Greta also asked, does migrants have opportunities to participate in any kind of decision making in the countries that you have researched?
Okay, so this is something I've not looked at directly, but I have looked at how climate adaptation plans in cities and whether they have any sort of participatory approaches or consultation in their design phases, or is it something that's just added once things are completed and, you know, it's just cursory feedback or tokenism? A good example, and also I live in Barcelona, so maybe keep my bias aside, but the one I know is the platform called Decidem in Barcelona, which is a platform by the city government, which gives all registered users or residents a chance to vote on projects in their neighborhood or initiatives like bike lanes or rooftop gardens. So this can be regardless of your migration status, but then you need to be like a registered person in the city and have like a NIE or TA number. So that's the one off the top of my head.
Thank you so much, Fizza. One more question to Joana. Salah asked, what analysis? Yeah, you can read. Oh, I can say. So what analysis method did you use for your data? Please briefly share if she missed it during the presentation.
Thank you so much. I don't think I did. I did mention the analysis method. So basically, in anthropology, during ethnographic work, I use this thing here where I write down everything that happened. This diary started in April of 2022 and it goes until June of 2024. So basically, during our conversations or afterwards, I would just write down as much as I could. We have a new guest speaker here, yeah. Zoe, sorry about that. But basically, I would just write down. If I had any questions, I would just ask later on in the field. I spent 2 years in Setúbal, 1 year in Sesimbra, pretty much. And basically I just take my notes and I use content analysis and discourse analysis. For example, in things that relate to climate change, I would just put all of the perceptions on a list and then aggregate them as it is interesting for me for whatever it is I'm writing. And I know it sounds a bit abstract, but I hope you got the picture.
Thank you, Joana. Yeah, you can answer, Fizza. How did you protect the data if the consent form was online for many questions? So I
Yeah,
just
no, thanks. I answered that, but I had a question for Joanna actually. I found your research very interesting, and also given like the heavy focus on ethnographic data, I was just curious if this is something you have to kind of reconcile with, using these creative methodologies, or even from like your research evaluators, if you're ever asked about sort of fulfilling these kind of technical data methods, or
Yes,
if
I'm gonna
that's
answer
not
that.
something.
Sorry. The technical data is because like just doing the project that it's very harsh to get with a consent, and it's about very harsh protective measures for the consent forms and other forms protecting the vulnerable groups, right? That's it. That's just how did you protect? Maybe I will have an example of how to do that better in our research. That's it. And my next question is more not so technical based, but based on your research. Do you have plans to present them to the decision makers to do something about it? Because it's a very obvious struggle for the migrants. They are marginalized to reach these green spaces. So since I'm a social policy major, I just thinking about the decisions that makes life more equal, So yeah, that's my main question out of these all actually.
Okay, I'll go ahead and answer that. Yeah, it's a very, very important question you have, Greta. So one thing that we're also doing to kind of incorporate policymakers' perspective, and before we give our judgment, we already know what the landscape is like, but we're also interviewing policymakers in each city. So, for example, Athens has these chief heat officers, and people in urban planning and housing. And then the plan is to eventually have sort of events in each of our cities, because, for example, one of the methods is called photo voice, where we're asking migrants to take pictures of spaces where they're vulnerable. So we might do like exhibitions followed by a talk with that. And then I should mention there is a person on the team who is only looking at policy. So I guess this will be their domain to kind of see how to target and also how to make sure all this information that is collected doesn't just sit with us in the project, and it eventually reaches the governments and policymakers.
Thank you for your answer.
Thank you, Fizza. Thank you, Greta, also for the question. One more question for Alexandra. Glaze asked, do you think the digital literacy among ages will influence the track of the mapping of the research?
I don't think so, because yeah, the emphasis on what we did was not on the digital maps. We like only the participants that wanted they could use the digital tracker, but for all the others we had physical maps, so it was not digital literacy was not a limitation in this case.
Oh, that's great. So we have more minutes if someone have more questions, but I would like to thank you, Joana, Fizza, and Alexandra, for your time, and all the participants to be here in this afternoon. It was a fruitful presentation, discuss, and research. And I'm really grateful to have you all here. So if you don't have any more questions here in the chat. So thank you so much. I hope you can see each other again in other place like that, able to discuss and exchange so much. So thank you so much and see you soon, I hope.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, bye.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Ferlanda,
Bye.
for having us. Bye bye.